The prison walls of Redwater Correctional Facility, Alabama, loomed like a fortress built to swallow secrets whole. Rust-colored bricks, razor wire curls, and watchtowers glowing with searchlights gave the place an almost medieval darkness. Inside, silence was broken only by the echo of boots and the distant clank of iron doors. Warden Michael Harlow walked through the corridor with his usual stiff gait, his eyes scanning the cells. To the guards, he was stern but predictable. To the inmates, he was a ghost they feared and whispered about. But one prisoner, Danielle Brooks, watched him differently. Danielle, 32, sat on her bunk, her eyes sharp and unreadable. She had a past full of fire and poison. Convicted for armed robbery, she carried herself with the quiet power of someone who had learned survival inside cages. When Harlow passed her cell, her lips curved into a faint smile. "Evening, Warden," she said softly, her southern drawl, dripping like honey, turned bitter. Harlow paused, met her gaze through the bars. There's something in her eyes, mockery or a dare. He shifted uncomfortably before replying, "Lights out in 10, Brooks. Stay in line." As his footsteps faded, Danielle leaned back, whispering to herself, "One day, you'll stop pretending you don't see me." Later that night, the prison hummed with restless energy. Inside the warden's office, fluorescent light flickered over paperwork stacked like tombstones. Harlow sat behind his desk, loosening his tie, when a knock disturbed the silence. "Come in," he said. It was Danielle, dressed in prison blues, her hands cuffed but her eyes burning, escorted by a guard. "Brooks wanted to speak with you, sir," the officer explained. Harlow frowned. "At this hour?" The guard shrugged. "Says it's urgent." When the door closed, leaving the two alone, Harlow exhaled. Danielle stepped closer, her voice low. "You keep pretending you're untouchable, Warden. But even kings fall. What do you want, Brooks?" His tone carried irritation, but his pulse betrayed him. "A deal." Her lips curled. "You give me certain freedoms. I give you loyalty, company, maybe more than company." Harlow's jaw tightened. Inside, a storm raged. "This is dangerous. She's dangerous. But why does her voice slip under my skin like smoke?" He rose, looming over her, trying to summon authority. "This conversation never happened. Go back to your cell." But Danielle leaned forward, so close he caught the faint scent of cheap soap mixed with defiance. "Oh, it happened. And one day, you'll remember my offer." Her words hung in the air long after she was escorted out. That night, as the prison slept, Harlow lay awake. Shadows stretched across his ceiling, whispering doubts. He replayed Danielle's eyes, the way she spoke his name without speaking it. He told himself he was in control. He told himself this was just another manipulative inmate. But deep down, he knew something had shifted. The fortress of Redwater Correctional was strong against riots, storms, and breakouts. But it was not built to withstand temptation, and Danielle Brooks had just cracked its walls. The next morning, Redwater Correctional carried its usual rhythm, doors clanging open, guards barking orders, inmates shuffling in lines like shadows. Yet, for Warden Michael Harlow, everything felt slightly off. Every echo of boots, every glance from the inmates seemed sharper, heavier. Last night should have never happened, he thought. But Danielle's words haunted him one day. "You'll remember my offer." In the cafeteria, Danielle sat with a small circle of women, her posture relaxed, her voice low but magnetic. Other inmates leaned in, hanging on to every syllable. She had that dangerous charisma, wrapped in calm composure. When Harlow entered, silence swept across the hall. Trays paused mid-air. Danielle lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes across the room. She smiled, slow, deliberate. Harlow looked away, heat creeping into his neck. Later, in his office, Officer Simmons knocked. "Warden Brooks is asking for you again." "She's been persistent," Harlow sighed. "Why am I not surprised?" "Fine. 10 minutes." When Danielle entered, her wrists shackled, she moved with elegance, as if the chains were ornaments rather than restraints. She sat across from Harlow, leaning forward slightly. "You could have ignored me, but here we are," she whispered. "You're playing with fire," Harlow said. "Whatever game this is, it ends now." Her eyes narrowed. "No game, Warden. Just survival. You think these walls protect you, but they don't. Not from what I know. Not from what I can give you." He frowned. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Danielle smiled faintly. "Freedom. A taste of life beyond this concrete coffin. I can make you feel alive again." His chest tightened. Is this manipulation, desire, or both? He had spent years burying himself in routine, in discipline. Yet this inmate, with her piercing gaze and dangerous confidence, was peeling away layers he had long forgotten. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Because you're already halfway mine," she said. The silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. That evening, Harlow walked the prison yard alone. Inmates clustered in corners, playing cards, smoking, whispering deals. Guards patrolled with rifles, their eyes scanning for trouble. Yet, amidst the noise, he caught sight of Danielle standing by the fence, her face tilted to the sky. "She's a threat," he told himself. "But why can't I look away?" He approached her under the guise of inspection. The chain-link fence cast shadows across her face. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked at him with those defiant eyes. "You think about my offer?" she asked softly, almost drowned out by the clamor around them. He didn't answer, just stood there, torn between duty and something far darker. "You will," she whispered, before walking away, her shackles clinking like a countdown that night. Alone in his house on prison grounds, Harlow poured himself a glass of bourbon. His hands trembled. He thought of his late wife, of the loneliness that had hollowed him out for years. And then he thought of Danielle's smile, her voice curling around him like smoke in a locked room. He slammed the glass down, shards cutting his palm. Blood dripped onto the counter, red against cold steel. "This ends now," he muttered, but deep inside, he knew it had only begun. The prison night was alive with the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant clang of gates, and muffled voices behind cell doors. But somewhere between the rigid order and constant surveillance, cracks began to apron cracks that allowed shadows to slip through. For Warden Michael Harlow, those shadows became a secret world he could no longer resist. It started small. A late-night check that ended with him pausing at Danielle Brooks' cell longer than necessary. A glance exchanged through the bars. Then whispers carefully timed when guards weren't watching. Every night, the words grew longer, heavier, until silence between them felt unbearable. One night, he unlocked her door. Danielle stepped out, her shackles rattling softly. She didn't ask questions, didn't gloat. She only whispered, "Took you long enough." They met in his office, the door locked, blinds drawn. Papers and reports were pushed aside, replaced with tension so thick it felt like the walls themselves were sweating. Harlow paced, fists clenched. "This is madness," he muttered. "If anyone finds out," Danielle interrupted, her voice silk and steel. "No one will. You control everything here. You hold the keys, Warden." She stepped closer, and though every part of him screamed to stop, his body betrayed him. He could feel her presence like a storm pressing against glass. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low. "Because you need it," she replied. "And because I do too." Days blurred into nights, and the meetings became ritual. Danielle's cell door would open when the halls were quiet, and she would slip into Harlow's office like a ghost. Sometimes they spoke in whispers, trading secrets about their past sorrow, about the wife he lost to illness, Danielle about the streets that taught her to fight or die. Sometimes silence spoke louder, their proximity electric and dangerous. Harlow knew it couldn't last. Every time he touched the cold iron keys, a voice in his head warned, "This is the kind of mistake you don't walk away from." But temptation had its claws in him now, and Danielle knew exactly how deep they went. One evening, Danielle traced her fingers across the warden's desk, her eyes gleaming. "You ever think about what this place really is?" Harlow frowned. "A prison?" "No," she said. "It's a graveyard, a place where people rot while the world forgets them. But you," she pointed at him, "you're the gatekeeper. You decide who gets a breath of life." He looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was no ordinary inmate. She had the mind of someone who played long games, and now he was a piece on her board. "You're dangerous, Brooks," he whispered. She smiled, leaning close enough that her breath touched his ear. "And you love it." Later, when Danielle returned to her cell, Harlow lingered alone in his office. His reflection in the glass window looked like a man, unrecognizable, haunted eyes, clenched jaw, sweat at his temples. He told himself this was still under control, that no one suspected. But deep down, he knew the truth. Prisons may keep bodies contained, but secrets had a way of breaking free, and this one was already rattling its chains. The summer heat clung to Redwater Correctional like a second skin, seeping through the concrete walls, making the air heavy and restless. Inside his office, Warden Harlow sat at his desk, staring at a medical report that had been slipped under his door during morning rounds. The bold letters at the top made his throat tighten. "Confidential medical record. Danielle Brooks." He hesitated before opening it. His fingers trembled, the paper crackling like fire. And then he read "positive, HIV." The word hit him like a hammer. His vision blurred. He dropped the paper, but it might as well have burned itself into his memory. For several long minutes, he couldn't breathe. The room closed in around him. His chest pounded. He thought of the nights in this very office, the stolen moments, the touch of Danielle's skin against his. His stomach turned to ice. "No, no, no, no," he whispered, clutching his head in his hands. That evening, when the halls fell quiet, he went to her cell. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot. Danielle sat on her bunk.com as ever, reading a worn paperback. When she saw him, she set the book aside, lips curling into a slow, knowing smile. "You read it," she said softly. He gripped the bars until his knuckles went white. "You knew." She tilted her head. "Of course I knew. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked, fury and fear tangled together. Danielle stood, stepping into the glow of the hallway light. Her eyes were sharp, unflinching. "Because you never would have come close if I had, and I needed you close." Harlow staggered back, shaking his head. You've ruined me." Her smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. "No, Michael. I freed you. You've been living like a corpse ever since your wife died. I gave you something to feel. You wanted life, and I gave it to you raw, dangerous, real." His heart thundered. "You call this life? You call this freedom?" Danielle leaned against the bars, her eyes boring into his. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning. You'll see." The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Every cough, every bead of sweat, every ache in Harlow's body felt like an omen. He avoided mirrors, unable to look at himself without seeing Danielle's smirk reflected back. At work, his temper frayed. Officers whispered about the warden's sudden change, the dark circles under his eyes, his distracted stare. Paperwork piled up, unanswered calls echoed through his office. He was unraveling, and Danielle knew it. At night, when he closed his eyes, he saw her lips, her touch, and the whisper, "One day, you'll remember my offer." Finally, he confronted her again, this time in the yard under the harsh glare of floodlights. Guards stood at a distance, unaware of the storm brewing between their warden and an inmate. "What do you want from me?" Harlow demanded, his voice sharp with desperation. Danielle stepped closer, her chains glinting in the light. "What I've always wanted: control, a voice, a way out of being forgotten. And you," she pointed at him, "you're my way. You think you can blackmail me," he hissed. She smiled, that same unshakable smile. "I don't need to. You've already given me everything." As the guards called time and led her back to her cell, Harlow stood frozen in the yard, sweat dripping down his temple despite the night breeze. She was right. The infection wasn't just in his blood, it was in his mind, his soul. Danielle Brooks had poisoned more than his body. She had poisoned his life. The warden's office, once a place of order and authority, had become a prison of its own. Michael Harlow sat slumped at his desk, head in his hands, sweat dampening the collar of his uniform. The tick of the wall clock echoed like a death knell. Every second dragged him deeper into the abyss. He hadn't slept properly in days. His dreams bled into waking life visions of Danielle's mocking eyes, the hiss of her voice, the weight of her secret crawling through his veins. HIV, infected, marked. The word pulsed in his head with every heartbeat. One evening, Lieutenant Ramirez knocked on his door. "Sir, everything okay? You've been different." Harlow looked up, eyes hollow. "Different," he croaked. Ramirez shifted uneasily, snapping at staff. "Missing reports. Even the inmates are noticing. If something's wrong, you can talk to me." For a fleeting moment, Harlow considered confessing spilling the poison out before it killed him. But then he saw Ramirez's face, saw how the truth would unravel everything, his career, his reputation, his life. "I'm fine," he said flatly, dismissing the lieutenant with a wave. When the door closed, Harlow's hands shook so violently he knocked over his glass of water. The liquid spread across the desk like a stain, unstoppable. The guilt metastasized. He saw Danielle everywhere, in the halls, in the cafeteria, in the reflection of the glass, when he looked out over the prison yard. She haunted him, not with threats, but with her silence. At night, he visited her cell again, against every instinct. She sat cross-legged on her bunk, serene as a monk, as though she'd been expecting him. "You're falling apart," she whispered. "Why me?" His voice broke. "Why did you do this to me?" Danielle leaned forward, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Because you needed it. Power without consequence rots a man. Now you feel consequence. You feel alive. I feel dead," he muttered. She smiled faintly. "No, Michael. Now you understand what it means to live in chains." The walls around him seemed to close in tighter every day. Reports piled high. The governor's office called twice in 1 week, demanding explanations for missed deadlines. The staff tiptoed around him, whispering when they thought he couldn't hear. At home, his isolation deepened. The photos of his late wife mocked him from their frames. He imagined her voice, gentle, disappointed. "This isn't who you were." Whiskey became his only confidant. Bottles disappeared into his desk drawers, into the glove compartment of his car. Each drink numbed him for a moment, only for the dread to return stronger. Then came the hallucinations. Walking the prison yard, he swore he heard Danielle's laughter ripple through the crowd of inmates. In the showers, steam curled into shapes that resembled her face. At night, when the fluorescent lights flickered, he saw her standing in the corner of his office, silent, smiling. He blinked and she was gone. One evening, during lockdown, he lost control. A guard accidentally dropped a set of keys, the clang echoing off the concrete. Harlow snapped, shouting so violently that the entire block fell silent. His voice echoed off the walls, a broken man's roar. Afterward, he locked himself in his office, trembling, chest heaving. He pressed a pistol against his temple, fingers trembling on the trigger. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he couldn't do it. Not yet. Danielle had sunk her claws too deep. He wasn't free, not from her, not from himself. The infection was no longer just in his blood. It had infected the prison. The walls seemed to whisper her name. Danielle. The prison was unusually quiet that night. Rain lashed against the barred windows, each droplet tapping like impatient fingers. Warden Michael Harlow sat alone in his office, the hum of the fluorescent bulb above flickering in sync with his heartbeat. His tie hung loose, his shirt stained with sweat and whiskey. The man who once ruled with iron discipline now looked like a ghost in uniform. The phone on his desk rang. He didn't answer. It rang again. Finally, he picked it up. "Harlow," he muttered. A cold voice replied, "Governor wants those reports on his desk tomorrow morning. No more delays." Harlow closed his eyes, gripping the receiver tightly until his knuckles turned white. "They'll be there," he lied, then hung up. Papers lay scattered across his desk in red. What did reports matter when his veins carried a slow, invisible death? What did rules matter when the walls themselves whispered his failure? That night, against every instinct, he found himself outside Danielle Brooks' cell again. The corridor was dim, shadows stretching across concrete. Danielle sat on her bunk, her posture regal, as if she were a queen in exile, rather than a convict in chains. "You look worse every time you come here," she said softly. Almost tenderly, Harlow's voice cracked. "You ruined me." Danielle tilted her head, studying him with something between pity and cruelty. "No, Michael. I revealed. The cracks were already there. I just widened them." He gripped the bars, his forehead pressed against the cold steel. "I can't live like this. The nightmares, the whispers, the blood test results. I'm too scared to take." His voice faltered. "You're already dead," she whispered. "The moment you chose me over the rules, your fate was sealed." He flinched at her words, stepping back as though struck. In the days that followed, his decline became impossible to hide. Guards exchanged worried glances. Ramirez approached him again. "Sir, you're not yourself. We need stability." "If something's wrong," Harlow erupted, slamming his fist on the table. "I said I'm fine." His voice cracked with desperation. Silence followed, Ramirez retreating with wary eyes. Rumors began to spread. Inmates sensed blood in the water. Whispers floated down corridors, the wardens slipping. Danielle, though, remained calm, her silence more dangerous than any outburst. Then came the breaking point. During an inspection, a fight broke out in the yard. Two inmates clashed, fists flying, guards rushing to intervene. Harlow froze. For the first time in his career, he didn't bark orders, didn't move. He just stood there, paralyzed, watching chaos unfold. Danielle's eyes found his across the yard. Amidst the brawl, she smiled a small, knowing smile that gutted him. The fight was eventually subdued, but Harlow's reputation wasn't. Word spread fast. The warden froze. The man who was supposed to control everything had lost his grip. That night, he returned to his office, trembling. He pulled open a drawer, retrieving the pistol he'd hidden weeks ago. He stared at it, the weight heavy in his palm. His reflection in the dark window stared back, a broken man trapped in his own cage. Danielle's voice echoed in his head. "You're already dead." His finger brushed the trigger, but before he could act, a sound startled him, the faintest laugh, carried by the storm outside. He dropped the gun, clutching his head, eyes wide. Was it real? Or was Danielle haunting him again? Either way, he knew one truth. There was no escape now. Not from her. Not from himself. The storm outside raged on, but inside, Michael Harlow had already shattered. The prison had a rhythm, an endless cycle of clangs, footsteps, and orders shouted across concrete walls. But lately, a new sound had begun to spread. They slithered through the cell blocks like smoke, seeping into every ear. "The warden's sick. He's losing it." Danielle's got him wrapped around her finger. By the time Warden Michael Harlow walked the halls, silence fell, but the stares lingered. He could feel them sharp, hungry, judging. He tried to walk with authority, but his shoulders hunched beneath the invisible weight. One evening, Ramirez cornered him in the staff corridor. "Sir, we need to talk. The men are nervous. The inmates sense weakness. If we don't get ahead of this," Harlow snapped, his voice low and venomous. "You think you know what's going on, Ramirez? You think you have any idea what it's like carrying this place on your back?" Ramirez stood his ground. "I know what I see, and I see a man slipping." The words struck harder than any punch. Harlow shoved past him, his hands trembling. Ramirez's voice echoed down the hallway. "Whatever's eating you It's going to eat this prison alive. That night, Danielle appeared in his office again, as if summoned by his unraveling. She leaned against his desk, shackles glinting under the desk lamp. "You look tired, like a man being hunted." "Because I am," he hissed. "Every guard, every inmate, they're watching me, waiting for me to fall." Danielle smirked. "And when you do, they'll forget you ever existed. But me, I'll remember. I'll keep your secret." Her words were laced with poison, yet carried a strange comfort. He hated her and needed her in the same breath. In the cafeteria the next day, the whispers grew bolder. Inmates glanced at him openly, laughter biting at his ears. Two women seated near Danielle chuckled as he passed. "What's so funny?" he barked. They went silent, eyes wide, but Danielle leaned forward, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Nothing, Warden. Just remembering secrets we keep at night." The room stilled. Guards froze. A single metal tray clattered to the floor. Harlow's face flushed crimson. He wanted to shout, to deny, but the damage was done. Danielle's words hung in the air, dripping with implication. That evening, Harlow sat alone in his office, lights dimmed. He gripped his head with both hands, whispers replaying endlessly in his skull. His reflection in the window looked less like a man and more like a shadow devouring itself. A knock rattled the door. Ramirez stepped in, face grim. "Sir, if you don't fix this, they'll eat you alive. You need to come clean. End whatever this is." Harlow's voice was hollow. "It's too late." Ramirez stared at him for a long moment, then walked out without another word. The next morning, the prison yard buzzed with unease. Inmates clustered together, whispers rising into a hum. Danielle sat apart, her gaze fixed on Harlow as he crossed the yard. Her smile was small, knowing, cruel dot in that moment. He realized the truth. His authority wasn't just cracking it, had already shattered. He wasn't the warden anymore. He was prey, and Danielle Brooks was the predator who had already sunk her teeth in. Michael Harlow's body had begun to betray him at first. It was subtle. Night sweats that soaked his sheets, a cough that lingered too long, a fatigue that weighed heavier with each passing day. But soon the symptoms grew sharper, undeniable. His reflection showed hollow cheeks, pale skin, and eyes ringed in shadows. In his office, alone, he opened a drawer and pulled out the sealed medical report he had been avoiding for weeks. His hands trembled as he tore it open, scanning the words that seemed to blur under his gaze. Positive, HIV. The paper slipped from his hands and floated to the floor. His mind spiraled. He thought of the moments with Danielle's stolen, reckless, forbidden. The intimacy that had bound him to her now tightened around his neck like a noose. When she appeared in his office later, her smirk said everything. "You know, Michael," she whispered, leaning close. "Some secrets don't stay hidden. Some live inside you, forever." His heart pounded in his chest. "You knew," he rasped. She tilted her head, shackles clinking. "Maybe, maybe not. But now we're bound in ways no prison walls can contain." Her laughter was soft, cruel, echoing long after she slipped back into the shadows. At home, Harlow stared at the empty chair across the table where his late wife once sat. He clutched an old photo, her smile frozen in time, while his own body shook with rage and grief. "How did I let this happen?" he whispered to the empty room. The guilt was unbearable, not just for his weakness, but for the secret he now carried inside his blood. A secret that could never be confessed without shattering everything. Back at the prison, the walls seemed to close in tighter. Guards noticed his declining health. Ramirez's concerned stares grew sharper. Inmates whispered louder. One afternoon, as he crossed the yard, Danielle caught his gaze. She mouthed a single word, "Mine." His knees nearly buckled. The predator-prey dynamic was no longer hidden, it was written in every look exchanged between them. Danielle wasn't just an inmate anymore. She was his executioner in the privacy of his office. Harlow slammed his fists against the desk, rage boiling over. "You ruined me," he shouted at the empty walls. "You destroyed everything." But deep down, he knew the truth. He had destroyed himself. Danielle had only provided the match. He had poured the gasoline that night. He dreamed of the prison collapsing around him, iron bars twisting like serpents, Danielle's laughter ringing through the ruins. He woke, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, convinced that the nightmare was no longer confined to sleep. The infection wasn't just in his blood, it was in his mind, his soul, his legacy. And it was spreading. By morning, word had reached the guards. Harlow overheard fragments. "He's sick." Something serious. Fear turned to doubt, doubt to rebellion. His authority was eroding faster than he could patch the cracks. Inmates sensed it too. A warden weakened was a prison unchained. Danielle sat in her cell, calm as a queen on her throne, while chaos began to simmer around her. The infection was no longer just inside Harlow. It had infected the prison itself, and it was only a matter of time before the whole place collapsed under its weight. The prison woke to silence. Not the usual quiet hum of early morning, but a suffocating stillness that wrapped around every corridor like a shroud. Guards exchanged uneasy glances as they made their rounds. Something felt wrong. In cell block D, Officer Martinez pushed open the heavy steel door. The moment she stepped inside, the silence broke. Screams erupted from the far corner. "Get the warden. Somebody get the warden." Danielle Brooks was slumped against the back wall of her cell, her body motionless, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. The pale light from the barred window fell across her face, revealing lifeless eyes staring into nothing. Within minutes, the prison exploded into chaos. Guards rushed in, inmates pressed against their bars, voices overlapping into a storm of sound. Ramirez arrived first, forcing order with a booming command. "Everyone back. Lock it down." But even as he barked orders, his gaze fell on Danielle's body. She wasn't breathing. Her lips were tinged with blue. The queen of whispers, the predator in shackles, was gone. Michael Harlow arrived moments later. His steps faltered. The woman who had ruined him, infected him, stripped him of power, now lay cold and still. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. He pressed a trembling hand against the bars of her cell, the weight of it all crushing him. "She's dead," Martinez whispered. The words echoed in his skull like gunfire. By noon, the prison was in full lockdown. Forensic teams filled the cell, cameras flashing, latex gloves snapping. Whispers surged through the blocks. Murder, suicide, payback. Harlow stood in his office, staring out the window at the chaos below. Ramirez entered, his voice hard. "They're saying overdose. Pills smuggled in, but it doesn't add up." Harlow's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "Too clean," Ramirez said. "Too convenient. She had enemies here, a lot of them, and now she's gone, just like that. Harlow turned away, gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles went white. Part of him felt relief, like a chain had been broken, but another part felt emptier than ever. Danielle had haunted him, and now her ghost would linger forever. That night, the prison buzzed with electricity. Inmates whispered through the bars. They killed her. She knew too much. The wardens involved. The last one cut deep. Harlow heard it in the corridors, saw it in the guards' eyes. The infection of suspicion had spread to him now. At home, he poured a glass of whiskey, hands shaking. He imagined Danielle's smirk, her voice echoing, "We're bound forever." Even in death, she owned him. Her secret was in his blood, her shadow in his mind. He drank until the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Back at the prison, Ramirez walked the cell block alone, flashlight sweeping across iron bars. He paused outside Danielle's empty cell. Something about the scene gnawed at him, the position of her body, the faint scratch marks on the concrete. Somebody wanted her gone. The beam of his flashlight caught the wall where a single word had been scratched, faint but clear. Liar. Ramirez's jaw tightened. Whoever Danielle had been pointing to, the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The rain fell hard that night, drumming against the prison's roof like a funeral march. Inside his dimly lit office, Warden Michael Harlow sat hunched over his desk, a bottle of whiskey half empty at his side. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling not from drink alone, but from the sickness eating him alive. Danielle Brooks was gone, but her presence lingered. Every creak of the prison, every whisper from the inmates seemed to carry her voice. "We're bound forever." He pressed his hands against his temples. "Leave me alone," he muttered into the silence. But silence never answered. The investigation into Danielle's death had turned the prison upside down. Officials demanded answers. Reporters swarmed the gates. Guards whispered behind closed doors. And in every rumor, Michael's name surfaced. They say the warden was involved. He knew about her. Maybe he wanted her silenced. Each word spread like poison. His authority, already fragile, was crumbling into dust. Ramirez entered his office late that night, rain dripping from his jacket. His face was grim. "They're asking questions. I can't cover up anymore," he said. Her death wasn't suicide. She left marked scratches on the wall. She was pointing at someone. Harlow's stomach nodded. "And who do they think it was?" Ramirez stared at him, his silence heavier than any accusation. Michael slammed his fist against the desk. "You think I killed her?" "I think you let her kill you first," Ramirez said quietly. "And now the whole prison's paying the price." The next day, Michael stood before the mirror in his quarters. His reflection looked nothing like a warden. His suit hung loose on his frame, his skin gray, his eyes hollow. He touched the glass, whispering, "What have I become?" Danielle's ghost smiled back. When the investigators came, he answered their questions with clipped words, each lie heavier than the last. But the truth pulsed in his veins. He was infected, damned. Every secret he tried to bury only clawed its way closer to the surface. That evening, walking the yard, he felt the stares of inmates drilling into his back. Whispers rose around him like a chorus. Liar, killer, weak. He stopped in his tracks, the sound drowning him. His knees nearly buckled. The world tilted in the dead of night. Unable to bear it any more, he returned to Danielle's cell. The air inside was heavy, as if it still carried her presence. He sank to the floor, his back against the same wall where her body had rested. "I should have stopped this before it began," he whispered into the shadows. "But you dragged me down with you, and I let you." His voice cracked, tears spilling for the first time in years. On the wall beside him, the word Danielle had carved leers teared back like a verdict. The next morning, Ramirez found the warden's office empty. The chair pushed back, the window wide open to the storm. A single letter sat on the desk, the ink smudged by raindrops. "I was her prisoner long before she was mine. The infection wasn't just in my blood. It was in everything I touched. Forgive me." Ramirez closed his eyes, the weight of it all pressing down. The prison walls loomed around him, but somehow they felt emptier than ever. Danielle Brooks was dead. Michael Harlow was gone. But their story of power, lust, betrayal, and death would haunt these halls forever. The storm outside raged on. Inside, the prison remained silent. Too silent